just a reminder that this is Bailey with NCHV. Just a reminder that all webinars are being recorded, but we're just recording those so that if you want to go back to any of the information that's on them, we will have that record for you. The link that Ken had sent out takes you to the private page for the CGET information, and you all, plus the NVAC team that are working on the CGET, we're the only ones that have access to that information, and then as soon as the grant review process is over, all of that will be deleted, so no one else has access to the recordings, but it is being recorded. My long-winded way of saying that. How's everyone doing? Ready for round 2 today?
Ready.
So ready. I think we're missing some folks, but it's 4, so why don't we go ahead and get started because there's a lot to go over today. Well, do we have Ken on the line? We should probably wait for him to be here. We'll wait for Ken to get on the line, and then we'll get started. And I promise I will keep it to 45 minutes. We can always address any pieces that we don't get to in one of the calls on Monday or next Wednesday.
Lane Williams on the line from DC.
Hello.
Hello. All right. We got Lane.
Yes.
Okay. I see we got Bridget.
Hello.
Hello. I see we've got both Chris's.
Alaska's here.
Alaska.
Hello. Lansing.
And I see Donna.
Here.
George.
Here.
Jason. Christy. Marla.
I'm here.
All right. And Shanine. And that's all I have on here, I think. Did I miss anybody?
Ken Fenner.
Oh, hello, Ken.
Patty Sipes.
Hi, Patty. Okay.
Anthony Sardini from Jersey.
Oh, sorry, Anthony. I missed you. You're right up at the top there. Okay, great. Did I get everyone?
Ian Wisman's here from AHP.
All right. Hi, Ian.
Howdy.
Hopefully I will have better luck with moving the slides than you did. Sorry. The system has a mind of its own. It's for nonprofits, so sometimes it's a little, slow. All right, team. We're going to go ahead and get started. As I mentioned in the first call earlier today, the linkages piece, there's a lot to it, and there's a lot more that's on the slides than we're really going to get to today. But just so you'll have all of that information available to you, and as always, just feel free to jump in there and share, what it is you're doing, what you've seen, warning signs, or positive aspects of applications to look for with programs. All right, so on slide 3, when it comes up, again, I went ahead and copied the pieces from the SGA that talk about what's required within the linkages section. So you'll see on this first slide here from the program year 2015 SGA, the quality of linkages section is worth up to 15 points. That's the piece that we're really going to focus in on today. But as you'll see from the SGA, and as I'm sure you've seen from reviewing other applications, discussion of linkages happens at several points throughout the application. And these pieces are just to show what's within the SGA as it refers to the quality of linkages. So there's a lot in the SGA that is talking about linkages, but I kind of unpacked what is discussed within there. As I mentioned, the linkages are mentioned in other sections. They should be, because a huge component of what the HVRP grantees or applicants are proposing to do is based on their relationship with community partners. Importantly, the HVRP application process requires that programs define in their community what the need is. So it's not a national set out for the program model based on what's decided by vets, the programs really need to decide and define what the need is. And I'll give you some examples of how they might do that as we go through, because they're, our local assessments of what the met and unmet needs are. What kind of resources are we talking about when we think of linkages? There are a couple different categories. You can think of them as being maybe veteran-specific, homeless-specific, supportive services-specific. All of these pieces are intersecting concentric circles. Within the linkages, we also want to see applicants that are focusing in on their ability to serve veterans who are homeless with dependent children, who have disabling conditions, who are chronically homeless, and who are women. As we talked about this morning, it will require more than saying we can serve female veterans who are homeless. It will require them to show how they're linked into serving those populations. A couple pieces on the process of their linkages section. As I mentioned in the beginning, their external resources are going to be really important. So if they're proposing to do everything in-house, unless it's a huge agency that really does everything, they're really going to need those community linkages to show the overall process of service delivery. Yes, Ian, we did start recording. Thank you for reminding me.
No worries.
Thank you for that. What we want to see within the linkages section is a reference to services, but also to the bigger picture planning initiatives. Like we talked about this morning, there are limited HVRP funds, so agencies that are in receipt of those funds really need to show that they're leading the effort in their communities, that they're involved in efforts to end veteran homelessness. Because if they're not really at the table in a meaningful way with those bigger discussions that are happening in their communities, they're missing out on the opportunity to connect veterans to vital resources, and they really need to be at the table. So we'll talk a little bit about what the planning looks like and what are some of the communities that you might see those bigger picture efforts going on. You can think of two ways that the SGA defines partners, and Ken, you can feel free to correct me on this. This is just the way that I saw it. On the partners that should be linked to, they're either clearly identified by name or they're referenced through the services that they would otherwise provide. So that gives a little bit of flexibility to the HVRP program to define what's available in their community. For example, they will talk about the American Job Center, but in a lot of communities it might have a different name that it goes by locally, and so they'll probably use both of those names. The first being clearly identified by a national name, the second being based on the services that are rendered. We're going to talk about the service agencies, but also the employers and employer-related partners that they would need to have to showcase within their linkages section. And they're going to be talking about the services, but they should also be talking about the gaps. It's great if they're proposing to provide an HVRP grant in a community, but if that area is already saturated with employment services, with HVRP grants, is it really the best use of funds to put another grant in that community? So that notification of service gaps would be very useful. The community linkages section, this is kind of how we portray it to HVRP grantees when they're thinking about that holistic approach. It has all these different elements. It is employment and training focused, but through the referral process, they should be connecting veterans to housing, to supportive services, including mental health care, physical health care, vision, dental, and newer within this SGA and given increasing focus is the role of legal services in helping to remove some of the barriers to employment. All of these pieces relate to someone's ability to obtain and maintain employment and are critical for surrounding the veteran with that more holistic, client-centered approach. I mentioned earlier that we want to be able to see within the applications that there's a clear match between the need in the community and the services that are being rendered. What you see up on the screen here is the challenge report. If you aren't familiar with the challenge report, it's done by VA, and it's based on VA healthcare users, homeless veterans who are VA healthcare users. So the population is slightly limited. But what's important about it is it shows with every medical center, within every VISN, what are the highest unmet needs for that community. And looking at this, you could see that a lot of these would be issues that would impact a veteran's ability to obtain and maintain employment. So this might be a grid that you see, or you might hear a reference to the challenge report, because it's a useful resource for taking a look at what are the unmet needs and how is the program bridging to meet those needs. They might also mention the gaps analysis. Some communities have access to a gaps analysis, which is a VA effort that's bigger than just challenge report, but includes the challenge report to look at what's available in the community, what's needed, and where there's still gaps. Now, the challenge report information is available publicly on a national level, but individual programs can request that information and receive it, so they have access to it. The gaps analysis information is not available to everybody. You have to be in a high priority community. So don't expect to see that for everyone because it might not be there within all applications. So where are they going to talk about linkages? You're going to see it show up, linkages show up in a couple different places. They're going to talk about it within their budget. They're going to showcase within their budget narrative how they have leverage costs for leverage funds for their HVRP program. That'll show up in their budget narrative. Their attachments to the technical proposal, that's where you'll see the MOUs, and within those MOUs you want to see some very clearly outlined processes of service delivery. Does anyone have any warning signs or pieces of useful information that they want to share on what you should look for MOUs? I think last year one person had brought up that you want to make sure that the MOU is signed by both parties. Excuse me. I think that that's a really important piece to look for. If they do have an MOU, you want to make sure it's signed both by the applicant and also by the agency that that is part of the MOU that they're proposing. And then most importantly, obviously, the technical proposal. It's where the bulk of the narrative is going to be talking about the services that they provide. So narrowing it down even more, you've got their whole proposal, and they're talking about linkages and a few other pieces. Where are they talking about linkages within the technical proposal? It's going to show up in the first part on their overall approach and strategy. When they're talking about their outreach workshops, they are going to be conducting outreach workshops to all sorts of partners. And it should be pretty clearly outlined there how they plan on engaging those partners. You can access the utility. We talked, I think it was on Monday, about doing outreach to unique partners to better serve the veterans who are now the majority of the homeless population, so the aging population, as well as younger veterans who are experiencing homelessness. So within those outreach workshops, you might want to see some reference to being engaged with student veteran groups. If they're targeting working with women, you might want to see reference to doing outreach workshops for domestic violence organizations at elementary schools, at high schools, and those pieces that might not have been in an HVRP application 4 or 5 years ago, but that are increasingly more important as we're seeing higher numbers of homeless veteran families and homeless female veterans. You might see it within the assessment and intake piece. One piece, I don't know if we've talked about it previously, and this might just be my own personal opinion, but I think if you see an HVRP applicant and they've got a real bad relationship with local partners, like with their local VA medical center and with their local continuum of care, you've got an applicant that's going to go up against a lot of challenges there because the majority of complementary resources are coming in through VA and through the continuum of care. And so if that's a fractured relationship, that grantee is going to have a really tough time with timely startup and with making sure that veterans are connected to the right resources. Again, that might just be my own personal opinion, but that's what we've seen over and over again with a lot of programs. When they're talking about job-driven training and how they're going to provide training, you'll see their linkages with the American Job Centers and possibly with compensated work therapy at that point. We've heard from some programs that getting an MOU with the VA is with their local VA medical center can be challenging, especially the last 2 years. Programs have had a really tough time getting that. So I don't think it's a huge warning sign if you don't see an MOU with the VA, but obviously if they have that, that's definitely an asset. Do you guys have any thoughts on the MOU process with VA or the American Job Centers, whether folks have had a tough time or an okay time getting those?
Yeah, this is Ken. I think organizations, especially new organizations, have underestimated the need to have strong MOUs with the VA hospitals because they think they can do street outreach to subpopulations of homeless veterans, and when they really have to have clinical referrals in order to really get their numbers. For example, homeless female veterans. So it's one of the best examples. The homeless female programs, I know this isn't going to be a homeless female veterans, but you may see an application, a generic HVRP application that proposes to serve homeless female veterans because they don't have to be a homeless female grantee per se to serve homeless female veterans. So let's understand that. But if they're saying they're going to serve homeless female veterans, they have to have linkages to clinicians in the community that trust them with those referrals. Otherwise, they're just not going to get the referrals. Does that make sense? Because they thought they could do street outreach to homeless female veterans, and they found out that that's just not how that happens.
That's a great point, Ken. This is the challenge that we've seen in a lot of programs, especially over the last 2 years. Is we talked about on Monday, there's a shifting dynamic within the overall homeless veteran population where that middle group, the 30 to 50-year-old age group, that group is largely housed at this point, and so you have veterans who are 55 and older, who have some really serious challenges when returning to work. Some, not all, and we'll talk about that more when we talk about supported employment interventions and intensive interventions and services for veterans who are aging and on the streets. But organizations that are proposing to serve female veterans, veterans with dependents, and young veterans, and that's really what they're building the structure of their application around, need to show something beyond street outreach because they're not going to find those veterans there. There has to be a more in-depth strategy. We used to see applicants that said, well, we have a GPD program on site. The VA has recently cut back on a considerable amount of GPD beds. It's been several hundred beds, and so there's no clear, you can't make that clear assumption that just because a program has transitional housing on site that they're going to get a steady stream of eligible veterans in for HVRP. So it's gotten more complicated, and you'll see that in these other parts of the technical proposal. And, of course, sorry, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, and I know I'm looking at the option year recommendations coming in from several of the regions, and I think in one region, I think it's the Dallas region, there's at least 4 organizations that are withdrawing their applications for option year funding. That's freed up almost $1.6 million in addition to what we've advertised in the SGA. And I'm wondering if we should do some analysis to find out what are the reasons for their withdrawal. Does it have to do with performance? Are the jobs not available, or are they just not having the numbers of homeless veterans that they thought? Or
this is the enlistment. I can actually speak to that a little bit, at least in 2 of the grantees. It is because the reductions in homeless veterans, it is harder for them to meet the goals, and a couple of them have already reduced their goals at least once or multiple times. So I think that this issue is only going to continue to emerge as we move forward, and there's fewer and fewer homeless veterans out there, and more are being housed by SSVF, by rapid rehousing. So there's a disconnect between the eligibility between SSVF and HVRP, as we know. But that said, there's a lot of dollars out there that are housing veterans. So there's simply fewer and fewer homeless veterans out there. So I think this is something that'll probably have to shift towards a prevention model in the coming years. Otherwise, a lot more grantees aren't going to be able to make their numbers, or we're going to have to think about changing metrics.
That's a good problem to have, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, that's a great problem from my perspective.
Hey, Ken, with Texas specifically, we did have a number of grantees that withdrew their option year funding request. That was performance related, and also that was it had something to do with reporting a little bit. The grantees themselves had some issues with unrealistic goals, so there was a combination of that. And David can actually probably better attest to that if you want to give him a call or
Who is this?
This is Jason Evans from Texas.
Oh, wonderful.
So yeah, if you want to talk to David Boat about it, he's got the specifics and stuff like that. He could probably better answer that question. But yeah, we have seen some problems, and unrealistic goals is something that we'd like to address with this meeting. It was addressed this morning, so it's good that we're on the right track.
Cool.
So, some of these communities are setting out very aggressive goals for moving veterans into housing, and that's at the end, but I think it's worth bringing up now. You do have communities that maybe, even right now, if they were to write their application, the data they have available to substantiate what they're asking for might be the 2014 point-in-time count, because that's the most recent publicly available data that they can give you to look for their application. But by the time they're awarded and by the time they start serving veterans in their community, the situation on the ground might have significantly changed. For example, New York is a great example to look at there. If you look at their 2014 point-in-time count versus their number of veterans who would be eligible for HVRP, their number of veterans who are homeless right now, it's significant. It's over a 50% drop. And so those pieces are important to look at. Maybe taking a look at, and I don't know what all you could have with you during the grant review process, but there are very aggressive community plans that have been set out by those agencies that are in 25 cities communities, which is a large initiative by VA. And their very aggressive plans are moving veterans into housing very quickly. One of the important parts in this section in particular that I hope we can really unpack is the way that the HVRP is proposing to serve veterans who are homeless while they're still eligible for HVRP. It used to be, we're connected to grant and per diem. Veterans will be eligible for HVRP for 2 years while they're in grant and per diem. So we will work with them through grant and per diem. We'll enroll them in HVRP when they're employment ready, and then we'll work with them from then on out. And that process doesn't quite work that way anymore. It does in some communities, but in most communities, they would need to be able to outline, and in this section in particular, it should be there, they need to be able to outline how they're making that connection and enrolling eligible veterans while they're eligible before they're moved into permanent housing, because the window might be really short now. Instead of 2 years, it might be 2 days. Does that resonate with what some of you have seen with your grantees? There's some frustration out there of coordinating with SSVF and coordinating with the Housing First implementation with HUD-VASH. I'll take that as a yes. It makes perfect sense. So if we're looking at where their linkages might be, as I mentioned in the beginning, in the SGA, some of them are identified by name, some of them are implied by the services that they would render. Within the connection to service agencies piece, there should be a few partners that they list. As we mentioned in the beginning, they should have some connectivity to the healthcare program at their VA medical center. It will likely be the HCHV coordinator. There might be a slightly different name. They might, instead of listing the HCHV coordinator, say we work very closely with the grant per diem liaison, the HUD-VASH liaison, and the SSVF regional manager. So they might give the actual people who are in charge of program oversight instead of the that person's boss. It just depends on who they're working most closely with, but that would imply the same connection to the medical center. There's also a difference between connection to the homeless program staff at the medical center and connection to the medical center itself. So you would want to hopefully see that they're involved with the VA medical center director, because that's who is going to be able to send people to their stand down if they're proposing that as an outreach event. So just something to keep an eye on. We do want to see that connection to supportive services for veteran families to SSVF grantees. In most communities, there is service by an SSVF program. At this stage, they cover almost every continuum in the country, so it's highly likely that an HVRP program, unless they're very rural, is connected to a community where there's HVRP funds. The strength of the SSVF program in that community may be debatable, but you're likely to see in this round a lot of current SSVF grantees that are applying for HVRP funds. Also included here is the local Interagency Council on Homelessness organization. Now, they might phrase it a little differently depending on the community. Some states have an ICH. Other states might just refer to the continuum of care because they might be the main coordinating body. But I think what's implied there is that you want to see that they're connected to the agency that's running homeless services within their community. Also within the prescribed linkages would be connection to the Ticket to Work program. Every year we'll do trainings for all HVRP grantees as a training webinar outside of the open grant period on how to register to become an employment network through Social Security Administration Ticket to Work. So you may see that training webinar referenced within applications. I know programs have done that in the past, saying that we'll participate on this training and then we intend to apply to become a Ticket to Work employment network if they're not one already. We had done some work with Social Security Administration to try to identify how many current grantees were employment networks. And there aren't a whole lot, but we keep trying to improve that every year. So that part is a work in progress. But they should list out these pieces by name in their application.
Hey Bailey, I'm thinking we should give organizations that have linked with Social Security Administration to become employment networks high grades. And the reason for that is, without going into all of the details of Ticket to Work, for those of you that don't know, the Social Security Administration will actually reimburse the case service dollars spent to reintegrate a homeless veteran. So let's say, for example, the Social Security Administration the grantee spent $5,000 or $6,000 on a veteran. That once that veteran actually goes to work and presents that ticket to the employer, and the employer sends it in to Social Security Administration, I believe, SSA is actually going to reimburse that $6,000 to the grantee, and there's no strings attached. They can actually spend that money as they see fit. Hopefully, they'll reinvest it back into the program. So that's a great way to increase capacity. I don't think a whole lot of people know about that.
Yeah, I agree. It's an important resource, and the good part with agencies that are applying for HVRP that are also employment networks is the process can be a little cumbersome, but once they have it set up, like Ken said, it's a great source of just institutional revenue to support the work that they're doing. They could use that to pay for things like incentives, transportation costs, car repair, things that HVRP won't be able to pay for, but that their organization could pay for that are going to support those employment goals. But also that gives you a reference point if they're already an employment network, that they have some pretty strong institutional protocols in place because they were able to apply for that process, execute it fully, and work on it. They might also mention, related to Social Security Administration and Ticket to Work, if they are connected to a SOAR provider. SOAR is a method for expediting benefits application processes for Social Security Administration, so SSI, SSDI. If an agency is doing that, then they've got a pretty solid structure in place to connect veterans to benefits. We've seen that a lot of veterans who might be waiting on their VA benefit determination will get a determination sooner with Social Security Administration, and again, that's case-by-case basis. And that's at the point where they'll get that ticket and they can use it to support their employment goals and also bring that revenue back into the program. So there are a lot of steps to it, but both of those are useful pieces that we hope you'll see in some of these applications. Now, in this next section, you'll see some of the service providers that you might hope to see. And again, this is the whole big list. There might be some that are missing, but in your large communities, you would hope that they would have some connectivity to these pieces. And these are the services that are listed out within the SGA. So connection to domestic abuse and sexual trauma counseling and care. That might be, through a community mental health agency or another core service agency. Vision and dental services, those are pieces that are not necessarily paid for by the VA Medical Center, and so oftentimes programs might connect with a dental school or even like a mobile dental clinic, or they get those services donated pro bono from a licensed practitioner in the area. Those are really challenging to secure, so just be aware of that if they do talk about connection to vision and dental services, that's a real asset. Access to dental care can serve as a huge barrier for veterans when they're returning back to work. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir with that one. The physical and mental health care services, this includes counseling and health care. There are a couple options that they might list, and again, this is that important role of strong connectivity to the VA. I know a lot of community agencies don't work super well with their medical center staff. The time for having those poor relationships is over. We really need programs that are willing to just bury the hatchet and move forward with making sure the veterans are connected to the care they're eligible to receive, both on the benefits and on the health care side. For veterans who are enrolled in HVRP who are not eligible for VA health care, the health care for the homeless agencies can really play a big role in making sure they do have connection to the services they need. So you'd like to see both of those resources, both the VA, but also that connection to the community programs that are paid for through healthcare for the homeless. On the rehabilitation side, there are a couple different dynamics to that, and programs could go a few different directions. Depending on the service population they serve, you'll likely to see reference to PTSD and substance use treatment programs. Usually those are through the VA, but not always. You'll hope to see a connection to VOC rehab. So that's not necessarily VA's VOC rehab, VRNE. That might be VOC rehab from the state, which is not veteran specific, but can be a great source of funding for training, for education, and for accommodations resources, especially if they're proposing to serve veterans who have significant disabilities and might be in need of some assistive technology for accommodations in the workplace. Another mainstream resource that they could be connected to would be related to traumatic brain injury services. I can not guarantee, but I can just assume that most HVRP grantees will not have someone who's able to do neurocognitive assessments on staff. I'm just going to go ahead and make that assumption. But they can, whether they have a screening tool that is just a basic screener to see if someone may have experienced a brain injury during their homelessness, during their service, or at any point in their lifetime that might be impacting their current ability to return to work, or whether they just have one question on their intake form that asks that, then they can make the referral to another community agency that could do a more comprehensive screening. And those agencies do exist. In most communities, they're at low or no cost to the veteran, and they should have that connection. Most HVRP programs that I know don't have a super strong connection to the traumatic brain injury services in their community. Those are mostly mainstream. They're not often on the VA side. The VA brain injury services tend to be more focused on the acute, on that very severe brain injury side, and not as much focused on the mild or moderate TBI that we might see with veterans who are homeless. Do you have any questions on those pieces so far? Does that make sense? Skipping down to the legal piece, in order to be able to provide legal services for veterans who are homeless, and this is if we go back to that previous list of unmet needs for both male and female veterans who are accessing VA homeless programs, you'll see that legal needs are part and parcel to 70% of those unmet needs. The HVRP might propose to meet legal needs a few ways. They might be part of a homeless court program, which is sometimes located at Sandown, not always. I know it is in San Diego. But increasingly, they're involved in veteran treatment courts. They might be connected to their local state bar. Maybe they have a pro bono legal service that is connected to them. These are each one of these pieces are opportunities for a strong applicant to really showcase how that relationship works, instead of saying, we know of a veteran treatment court in their community. They might say, we have regular meetings and participate in the veteran treatment court every 2 weeks. We are connected to this series of mentors through the veteran treatment court. The treatment court makes these referrals for eligible veterans back to our program. And so it really has that clarity, that granularity in how the services are being delivered. Here in the next couple of slides, you'll just see some examples of what a strong, a moderate, or a weak application might look like. We don't have a ton of time, and there are quite a few of these. I just wanted you to have them so you can go through and see what strong applications might look like. And again, keep in mind, like we talked about earlier, that your more rural programs are not going to have access to all of these things necessarily. They might not be able to have a co-located SSVF person. They might not have someone from the medical center who could come and be at their site providing benefits assistance every week. But I guarantee pretty much every HVRP can be connected to a local VSO who can come in and help with benefits processing. So you want to at least see those basics. If you do have an applicant that comes in and they don't talk about the medical center at all, or it's an adversarial relationship, they don't mention SSVF in any capacity, and they say on the benefits processing side, well, we'll help veterans submit their applications online. Oftentimes those are returned back. They're impossible to monitor if it's just submitted online without the assistance of someone else helping with that process. So that would be a weaker application. Also, I think worth noting is the large majority of SSVF programs do not provide medical or mental health care services on site. Sometimes that's a misconception that programs have, that just because they're a VA-funded program that they're able to provide all of the VA services on site. If a grantee talks about how all the medical care will be provided by this SSVA agency, they really should unpack that very clearly for you, because oftentimes that's a misconception that we see. Here are some of the other federal pieces that they may or may not be connected to. I won't go into the employment network piece because we talked about that quite a bit already. But again, if they don't mention any engagement with their continuum of care, if they're really, saying we can do this all in-house, we've got it covered, we're not connected to local voc rehab or state voc rehab, that's a cause for concern, because increasingly agencies need to be connected both to the homeless veteran-specific resources like SSVF, but also the wider homeless services network and the wider disability services network, so the continuum of care and the state voc rehab, respectively. We talked about that one. Now, really quickly, let's talk about the linkages to employer side. So there's a couple pieces on making sure they're connected to employers. It's one thing for an applicant to say, we're going to work really closely with local employers. It's another thing for them to say, we have a weekly job fair where employers come with positions they're ready to hire. We go to the Chamber of Commerce hiring fairs, every quarter. We advocate within our continuum of care to hire our veterans for open positions within the continuum. We have a co-located American Job Center staff member. We have a DVOP who's with us all the time, or a vet rep. Those are differences in how they might portray that relationship, showing either strength or basically just cursory, coverage of the details to try to gain additional points in the application. So they should mention these individuals by name, or these programs. They should talk about the local employers, the Chamber of Commerce, the continuum of care, any unions that might be highly represented in the area, and especially the American Job Centers. One piece that I think it's worth noting in their linkages to employers, you might have programs that talk a lot about employers and the great connection that they have, but they don't really talk about the training component. So we want to see in a strong application that they're making that connection between the veteran who walks in their program and having a client-centered case management model all the way to that placement with the employer using job training through likely a third-party agency or consecutive job training that leads to that employment placement. If they're missing that middle piece, the training piece, then they could have the greatest relationships with employers, but they're not necessarily doing that in a job-driven way. And this leads us to the linkages to employers that are kind of identified by the service. If you think of the process of HVRP service delivery, which you know well, it starts with doing assessment, connecting the veterans' interests and abilities to the labor market information, connecting them to appropriate training, ultimately resulting in that job placement and later follow-up and retention. These are a few of the partners that they should discuss in a strong application as working with for each one of these components. So instead of saying, we work with our American Job Center, they might say, which would be weak, we work with our American Job Center who connects us to the labor market information based on the assessments that we bring using My Next Move. Those are some of the pieces that can be involved. And again, here are some of the strong, moderate, and weak ways to look at those linkages. Just in the interest of time, I'll leave those for you, but wanted to go to how they show their linkages. For each one of the linkages that the programs mention, they should identify the specific provider, whether it's named in the SGA or implied by the service to be rendered. They should also identify the funding source. They might not have it for every piece, but they should have it for most of them. And also very clearly outline, and I think that's the heart of what we wanted to get at today, and with this section in particular, what is the type of linkage and what does that referral system look like? It needs to be a mutual referral from the HVRP to the other agency and back. It needs to show a very clear handoff so it's not so veterans don't get lost in the system, especially if they're in a rural area or they're working with a program that might take a couple of days to respond. That referral system should be outlined in the MOU. As I mentioned on Monday, you might see a linkages section that doesn't go into a ton of detail on a relationship but references the MOU, and the MOU might have a very clearly outlined linkage and referral process for each one of those partners. If they're missing any one of these pieces, if they just say we'll work with organizations that serve women veterans, they're really missing the mark on making sure that there's strong connectivity. So I mentioned in the beginning that this is more than just services, that these agencies need to show, the applicants need to show that they're involved in what's going on the planning side in their community. That means that they're involved in the bigger picture, the 5-year plan to end veteran homelessness by the end of this year. But each community likely has a plan that's being executed as we speak to end homelessness overall, including ending veteran homelessness. We really want to see what role they play in that effort. Are they part of the coordinated intake and entry system? Do they participate in the meetings? If you have an applicant that says, we go to the continuum of care meetings every quarter, that's not nearly as strong as someone who says, we're on a committee, we are involved in building the plan for our community, we helped structure the coordinated intake process. We want to see organizations that are applying that are really those leaders within their communities. And that leads us to which communities are receiving those big surges. These 25 cities that you see listed, and we'll have a walkthrough form. It's just a grid showing the current grantee breakdown and whether they're part of 25 cities, communities, and whether they're part of a couple of these other initiatives that we're going to mention in a minute. In these communities, there's intensive TA being provided by a VA contractor and by VA to end veteran homelessness. Each one of these communities has a consolidated plan that they've put together. It's informed by the data analytics that VA has and what resources are available and what the gaps are. And it's a long way of saying they're very highly structured plans for ending veteran homelessness. These communities have a lot going on already. If the HVRP program is proposing to serve veterans in one of these communities, they really need to be a partner that's already at the table, or it's going to be very challenging for them to be successful. A brand new applicant that has never had any experience with HVRP that's proposing to provide services in San Diego, for example, would really struggle to be successful if they're not already part of this work that's going on, if they're not really pushing to be a major player in the citywide initiative to end veteran homelessness. Oh, my map moved. There's another initiative that's happening within the VA surge of resources and energy to end veteran homelessness by the end of this year, and it's an interagency collaborative effort actually led by the Secretary of Labor through ICH to end homelessness in these target communities. So 25 cities was the starting point. The communities you just saw, those have that intensive effort. The next level outside of that is the 0 to 2016 communities. And as you can see, there are quite a few more of them, and I have a list on the next slide for you. These communities are also receiving very highly intensive technical assistance to end veteran homelessness in their communities. So again, if you have an applicant that's part of one of these communities, you really want to see that they're at the planning table in order to be as effective as possible in serving veterans who are homeless and getting them into employment before they're no longer eligible for enrollment in the program. These are all the 0 communities. There's a lot of them. I think there's 2 full slides of them. And also, if you go to the webpage for the CGET, there's one resource that wouldn't fit on the slides, but that I included up there for you. And those are the SSVF surge grantees. So those are also communities that received a huge surge in SSVF funding. Those communities are moving veterans into housing very rapidly. Again, if the SSVF is not working closely with those partners, it's going to be very difficult for them to identify veterans while they're still eligible for services. I ran over a little bit. I promised I would stay at 45 minutes, but Ken knows I like to talk and write a lot. Do you have any questions? Do you have pieces you want to toss out there about the linkages section? Is everyone ready to go home for the day? Except our Hawaii folks. Far away. Ken, did you have anything else on these pieces?
I think you did a really wonderful job, Bailey.
Oh, thank you. Well, there's a lot. The linkages section, I think, out of all of it, that's the most important piece because that really shows you how connected they are in their community, and that's going to be a big piece of how effective they're going to be able to be, especially if they don't have that long HVRP history. So, yeah, we're passionate about this piece. Linkages is important.
Hey, can we get – I might need this because this will be useful information when we're at the table and helping the Assistant Secretary or Deputy Assistant Secretary make selections.
I'm working on it. I just don't have it done yet.
Okay.
So what we'll have for you will be the current grantees minus the ones that are reapplying, the 25 cities, communities, whether there's overlap, the 0 to 2016 communities, whether there's overlap, and SSVF surge. What we don't have is the mayor's challenge, and that's a big push by HUD actually to get mayors very involved in ending veteran homelessness. The reason we don't have that is there's kind of inconsistency on which mayors are very invested and which ones are just signed on. So I don't know if it's the most useful data, but yeah, we'll have that for you. And so for folks on the line, this kind of just gives a cross section, but hopefully that'll be a helpful resource in deciding where there's still high unmet need.
Mhm. Okay. Well, I'll look for it. I think. Well, we can talk offline.
Yep.
All right. Good. Does anybody have any questions for Bailey?
All right.
All right, Bailey. Great job. I'm clapping for you. You did a great job.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time. I know it's late in the day, and we will see you, quote unquote, virtually next Monday on our next call at 12 o'clock Eastern.
Thanks, Bailey. Great job.
All right. Thanks, team.
Take care.
Thanks.